Chester Borrows.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This bill is one that has had its genesis out of good and sound common sense in an attempt to overturn some jandal-slapping sort of sale of liquor bill writing that was done in the previous decade. The fact is that the sale of liquor has been the subject of dogs' breakfasts of legislation over many, many decades, as people have sought to liberalise and to somehow change New Zealand's drinking culture and turn it into something it isn't. And members who were involved in politics years ago will remember those votes that tried to take the New Zealand drinking culture and turn it into something sort of cultural. Apparently, we all needed to be drinking like the French, because we know that the French will drink all day at various times. They start at a young age, they carry on until they fall over. No one seemed to remember that they have probably the highest rate of alcoholism in their country. And so they sought to move drinking culture within New Zealand away from something that was confined by hours, confined by age, and confined by legislation, and to occasion, into something where anything goes. And it certainly needed changing, but boy, there was some dumb stuff done. And now we then have people who are seeking to march the sale of liquor legislation back about 30 years, forgetting that back 30 years ago you weren't allowed to have liquor, for instance, in the vicinity of a dance hall. What that meant was that there was about 50 guys standing around the boot of an old Vauxhall with a couple of crates in it, sharing 10 flagons. And it was a totally different world in those days to the days that we find ourselves in today. And quite rightly and thankfully, the member has brought this bill before the House that says it's time that we had a little bit of balance to this, because previous parliaments wandered off down a track that was going to liberalise everything. So we took the age down to 18. We completely took any constraints off new products like the RTDs that we've spoken about. We tend to give some credence to those people who make their money out of the liquor industry and listen to their lobbying. We decided that a supermarket was something that sold groceries, not even thinking then that every corner dairy would seek to sell alcohol. And we thought that a supermarket was something that was acres and acres in size, and somehow they were better and more careful than any other vendor of alcohol. What quickly happened, of course, that those big supermarket chains moved as fast as they could to sell as much alcohol as they could, as cheaply as they could, at any hours of the day that they could, and they did a really good job of it, to the effect that today 70% of all alcohol consumed in this country is sold by supermarkets to people who may or may not enjoy too many drops. But the point is that as far as the retail side of it is that supermarkets are probably the most compliant of any other retail outlet of alcohol than there is. It's much harder to buy alcohol from a supermarket when you're drunk, and it's much harder to buy alcohol from a supermarket when you're underage than you can from anywhere else. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a problem with supermarkets selling alcohol, and so the new legislation that's coming before the House will restrict that. The ready-to-drink concoctions that have become so popular with people, especially the young people wanting to get into drinking alcohol, they're marketing it to young people as alcohol that doesn't even taste like alcohol. They sell it by the pallet loads, and that has alcohol per volume of somewhere between 4% and 20%, and so the new legislation that's proposed is going to reduce the alcohol per volume down to 5%, no more than 5%, and that's a good thing. And we're also, obviously the House is looking quite strongly at the split age option of selling alcohol to people who are over 18 in hotels and on licensed premises, but maybe going to 20 for those who are going to be purchasing to take alcohol off licence. And the purpose for that, of course, is to bring down the de facto take up the de facto drinking age, which at the moment is somewhere around the early to mid-teens, and we need very much to do something about that. But I think the thrust behind the Honourable George Hawkins' bill is about giving local people the ability to impact on local decisions as to who's going to sell alcohol within their communities. And we have ridiculous situations where there are dairies opposite secondary schools who are selling alcohol at $1 a can, $1 an RTD, that 18-year-old students can wander across the road at lunchtime, can legitimately buy alcohol in lots of 1 or 2 because that's the way the vendor's prepared to sell it. They're not even allowed to sell cigarettes in 1s and 2s, but they can sell cans of alcohol in 1s and 2s, and some of them up to 20% proof. So then that student can then drink that alcohol in the school grounds if he wants to as part of his lunch, or maybe it is his lunch, and then head back into the classroom for a snooze before he heads off home after school, picking up a bit of alcohol to knock off when he gets home. Absolutely ridiculous. And at the moment, the gap in the current legislation is that no good-minded citizen is able to object to a new consent being granted on the basis that there's already enough out there, or the proximity to schools or other venues around the community, and that is fundamentally wrong. So whereas the Members' Bill seeks to change that and give local people input into doing that, now we know that there will be a national alcohol plan. District councils will be encouraged to have district alcohol plans, and part of that planning process they'll have to consult with their communities, and then any application for a consent, not only a consent for a new premises, but of course the reinstatement of an existing consent will be up for members of the public to be able to object on a whole range of sensible bases, and good on them. So I thank the member for bringing the issue before the House. I believe that in many ways it has been a catalyst for the Law Commission and both governments on both sides of the House to look at the issue and to give back to the communities the ability to object to local consents, the very mechanisms people are using to have negative effects on our children and our communities. Thank you.
I call Sue Kidd.